Welcome to an Emergency Escape Collective podcast, everybody. I'm Caley Fretz. We do have an emergency today. We have some of the saddest news, I think, as a cycling fan that I have seen in some time. Woke up to this, have since done a bunch of digging, but, well, the long and short of it is GCN Plus is going to be no more. That would include the app and the live racing coverage as you currently know it. That doesn't mean it disappears completely. It also doesn't mean, for example, the GCN website goes away or the GCN YouTube channel goes away. But that is nonetheless a significant change in the way that I think a lot of our listeners, certainly myself, consume cycling television. To join me on this special episode, we've got Cosmo Catalano. Welcome, Cosmo.
Hello, I'm here. Happy to help pour one out for the GCN.
We brought you in because you have some experience with broadcast rights and some other things, mostly because you have to tell them to bugger off on a regular basis on social media.
I mean, nowadays, the relationship's pretty good. Tell me an astronomical number. I try to chip little pieces off of it, and now we're sort of friends sometimes.
And Joe, Lindsey, you've been looking into this story. You and I have both been looking into this story since sort of news of a sale in, was it September? And you bring a whole lot of insight into some of the backroom machinations of this particular corporate kerfuffle.
Yeah, that's the big question that we have now is how is this going to be similar versus different to what, say, NBC did with the Sports Gold app and to Peacock, because to Cosmo's points, the rights are quite a bit more convoluted on this one.
We should just start first with what is happening, right? And then we can talk a little bit about where we think it might go, and also just, I don't know, a bit of like a eulogy. Like, I'd like to do something at some point because like the reality for me anyway is that, like, this is, like I said, it's one of the saddest days I think in bike media in a very long time. And I should add, this is just an aside here, but it is exactly 1 year to the day that a number of us were laid off in a similar circumstance over at Outside. In addition to that, and really a bigger deal than us not being able to watch bike racing on TV, are apparently at least 102 folks who have lost their jobs in all of this already. And from what I heard, there's also an expectation that there may be even more at some point. I was speaking with a couple different staff, or I guess former staff members of GCN this morning, and they had teams in Belgium and in Japan and in Peru, and they get this message this morning, literally with 45 minutes notice. Like the internal communication went out 45 minutes before the external communication went out, and they had 45 minutes notice and basically just down tools, right, in the middle of a foreign country. And some of them aren't even sure how they're going to get home, for example. It's massively disheartening, right? Like, I mean, these are friends of ours so that work in the cycling media space. They're hugely talented people, 102 of them, I think largely in sort of the marketing divisions, certainly a lot of sort of the documentarians, the folks that have been putting together a lot of these GCN Plus documentaries, videographers, editors, tons and tons and tons of people, right? It's worth saying that is the worst thing to come out of all of this, as much as we are all sad about us, not being able to watch as many random bike races on a random Wednesday as we have been able to do for the last couple of years, and what I think we're going to look back on as really the peak of televised cycling. That is a bummer. Let's, pour one out for the 102 people who woke up this morning and thought they had a job and got to mid-morning and suddenly didn't.
Yeah, I think that absolutely has to be at the center of this, because media right now is just in an awful spot. Bike media feels like it's been in an awful spot for a few years now, and this is just sort of more bad news layered on top of bad news. You wonder, for these 102, people and growing, what do they find now to replace that? I think, for the people who watched a lot of the documentaries, who were interested in that catalog of coverage that they had, like there's obviously, what do we do for that now? But also, where does that come from? Who makes that now and for whom?
Yeah, I was going to add to that too. It's not, this isn't cycling tips. This isn't cycling news. This was like a new thing. This was an app. This was supposed to be a new way for people to get their cycling, for people who make this sort of content to get paid. And it seemed like pretty successful in that regard. Like, people were paying money to watch bike racing and to get all this stuff made. And it's so kind of doubly disheartening to see the business apparently not be usable. But again, like I have a lot of questions, probably more for you, Joe, about what's sort of happening internally, because I had been noticing Warner Brothers Discovery sort of had, at one point, I think 5 different sports brands, because they had TNT Sports, they had Eurosport, they had GCN, they had Discovery Plus, which carried some sports. I can definitely see why, from a corporate point of view, they felt like they had too many consumer touch points, but like just chopping one of them off entirely makes sense here.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the answer that I have for that is we don't know yet, because this is announced with 1 month to go. And the comparison that I drew in the story that I just put up on Escape was to what NBC did when it closed the Sports Gold app, which that news leaked out very quietly, but it came out in like February that they were going to shut down by the end of June. So that's a really long runway for something like that. This is, hey guys, in basically just over a month, GCN Plus, as you know it, is going to cease to exist, at least for people outside of the sort of the core Eurosport market. There's not any clarity on what's going to replace it.
I'm wondering a little bit if that runway is intentional, because I think what we're seeing now is, I mean, the reason we have this podcast is my Instagram feed is all meme pages of like, I can't believe GCN is going away. How could this happen? And I think there could be a case made for a potential buyer here. People like this a lot, and people want to keep this around. This is shaking the cycling world more than something like the drama over Sepp Kuss and Jumbo-Visma at the Vuelta, and that was a big deal.
Yeah, I think let's like take a quick step back, just in case people missed this. So we actually had some reporting around a potential sale of GCN in September, like I mentioned in the little intro there. What we were hearing at the time was there were a couple potential buyers. One of them was actually outside. One of them was Simon Ware, the original founder of GCN. Neither of those, both Rob and Simon never responded to my text messages. Not too surprising there. This does all seem to sort of correlate. I don't know exactly how it's going to play out, but the way that we kind of presumed things might go before, and this is based off of conversations with people that were inside Warner Brothers Discovery as well as inside GCN. They would essentially split the company into what it was pre-acquisition of Discovery and post, right? So the pre-acquisition GCN, which is now really all that's going to be left, apparently, under the GCN label, is the YouTube channel, which was very large and very successful. And now this website, right, which was launched relatively recently under our former colleague, Dan Benson, who was also laid off a year ago today. They've been doing fantastic work over on the website side. But those two things, I think, can be thought of slightly separately from the TV rights, which were never owned by any entity named GCN or Play Sports Group, which is the ownership group over top of GCN. Those were always owned by Discovery, Warner Brothers Discovery, the big corporate entity. That group of rights and what exactly happens with the live television is what we're talking about mostly on today's podcast. But it is an open question what happens to the rest of GCN too, because like I said, it was for sale in September. Like all of our reporting suggested that it was for sale in September. We don't know if they found a buyer. To your point, Cosmo, this could not only be a way to kind of shop around, potentially some of the rights package stuff, but also a way to like try to finally get GCN itself off of Warner Brothers Discovery's books, right? Because they clearly want to do that. But again, we don't know how that all is going to play out. I've reached out to a couple folks who sort of knew things last time, and nobody seems to know anything at this point in time, or at least is not telling me. So we don't really know what's going to happen to the website and the YouTube channel, other than, I did speak with some folks internally there that are quite high up, and everybody said, we're gonna keep going, we're gonna keep fighting, we're gonna keep making the stuff that we know how to make, do our jobs to the best of our ability, that kind of stuff. But again, the TV rights stuff is actually the sort of what people are mostly reacting to today, because everyone's like, how am I gonna watch my bike racing, right? How?
I don't know if I should say this on air, but as someone who has, since before GCN had the TV rights, I have been watching Eurosport using a proxy, like to get a European IP address. And it's interesting how, like, I was always sort of like, oh, should I switch over to GCN? Should I get this, all this extra cycling specific content? And it's very interesting because, like, kind of from that perspective, things are really unchanged. And I'm wondering maybe if that's how Warner Brothers sort of viewed it internally. They're like, oh, like there's really no change for our consumer here. And it's like, well, actually, yeah, there's a huge change, because this thing was a way to get bike racing in the United States that, yeah, I guess you could use a VPN and get stuff that comes over Eurosport. But like, there's a huge difference for the American audience between GCN and Eurosport.
There's also, I think internally, there were a lot of people pushing really, really hard for really good cycling coverage. It was GCN and Eurosport combined that built the cycling coverage product as we think of it. A lot of the commentators were there beforehand and will remain there afterward, right? Like some of the favorites, the Rob Hatches of the world that do an amazing job. They're Eurosport employees. They were never GCN employees, right? But if you think about the sort of like the before and after shows that happen with all these races, the breakaway with Orla and Dan Lloyd and Adam Blythe, and like the sort of the real cycling fans perspective that the broadcast started to take on, I worry that is one of the things that's going to disappear because there's not going to be the advocates internally to spend the money to do those kind of shows before and after. My fear is that, yes, okay, the rights end up back with Eurosport. If I really want a VPN, I can go VPN and probably find access to those streams, but I'm going to lose a whole lot of maybe some of the weirder races, which they won't chuck up at all, and all the stuff sort of packaged around it that GCN did such a good job with. Basically because there's going to be nobody internally to push for it. Like that's basically been Dan Lloyd, right? Dan Lloyd was head of race TV for the last couple of years, and yeah, they lose that internal advocacy.
So I think one of the interesting things that I'm seeing here is this focus on the Eurosport market. And I had a conversation with somebody about this where they said, well, surely, Discovery, Warner Brothers Discovery will figure something out for the US market. And my response was, yeah, but maybe not right away, because the market here, this race watching market outside of Europe is so much considerably smaller. I do wonder if from that, C-suite level, that 10,000 foot view, if they look at something like streaming rights for bike races in the United States and say, whatever, this is beside the point. This is a rounding error in the big equation. We need to, like you said, Caley, we need to get GCN sort of in its own world and split off. We'll deal with the broadcast rights. The broadcast rights that matter most are those in Europe. At least, here in the United States, Discovery does not own the broadcast rights to ASO events like the Tour de France, like Paris-Roubaix. Those are all with NBC. They don't own some of the other rights like Flanders Classics. That's Flow, which Flow is owned partly by Discovery. But that gets back to Cosmo's point about consolidation. And so I really wonder if at this point, part of the issue is that we've got a month to go until GCN Plus goes dark. And they, at least for non-Europe markets, they don't have a strong idea of what's actually going to replace it. And that's going to put us back into the bad old days of, surfing, of using VPNs to try to find some, random feed that doesn't block us.
I think it was iSimp Alaphilippe on Instagram had the intro to the GCN is going away email that everyone got, and then had just pasted "watch out for the ads" about halfway through, because this is the famous. There's a I'm going to say pirate website called Tiz Cycling. I say that with admiration because I'm amazed it exists, still exists, manages to continue existing, and they will frequently warn users, "Hey, here's a feed for this race. Watch out for the ads. Don't click the ads because you will get a virus or malware or something." And it is a running joke in the US if you're not familiar with the fight to get access to footage. I'm not excited about that.
Well, this is the bigger problem, and this is why I think it was so sad, is that there is a group of us, and frankly, a lot of them are probably listening to this podcast, who will go and seek this out and figure out how to get the coverage, right? Like there are ways. Not particularly legal, but they're also not illegal. Like you could do it, it's fine. In fact, I sort of made an executive decision earlier this morning that like, we're just going to talk about VPNs, right? Like if these big corporations are going to do this to us as cycling fans, screw them. I'm going to tell everybody I know how to get this content, whether they're supposed to be getting it or not. I'm over caring, and I don't think they can actually come after us for just telling people that VPNs exist and how to use them. But the bigger issue is that beyond this, our group of cycling nutters here who will figure it out regardless, there's a whole lot of people out there who were pulled into this sport in recent years because of the ease of access. I'm thinking about my parents. They listen to this podcast sometimes. Hey, mom and dad, they watch the Tour de France. My dad was a bike racer back in the day. Like they love a good bike race, but like they watch a heck of a lot more bike racing now than they ever did in the past because they can just boot up GCN and watch stuff, right? What happens to those people? Like, it's a rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing. Well, a receding tide also sinks all boats, right? Like that, as somebody who runs a cycling media company, it's a huge concern to me that people will, there's sort of the general audience growth that we've had in the last couple of years, which I very much would put down to the ease of access for GCN, is going to start reversing itself, and it's going to be bad for the entire sport that some dude in a suit at Warner Brothers Discovery has made this decision.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, is sort of the frictionlessness of sites and apps like GCN. That, like, you know, in the past, pre-GCN, I would wake up on a Saturday or Sunday morning in the fall or winter and want to watch cyclocross. And I'd have to make sure that I got up early enough that I could get a VPN going and find a stream that worked and all of that before the start. Now, with GCN, I wake up. If the race has already started 15 minutes ago, it doesn't matter. I just load up GCN, I go watch from the beginning, find the spot where I want to be in the race. There you go. It's super, super easy. You know, it reduced all the stress and everything out of trying to figure out how am I going to watch this race and also not give my computer like digital herpes. So now, like, yeah, that's I think everybody's fear, right? Is at least outside of the Eurosport market, is like, how do we reproduce that? Can we reproduce that? Will we? GCN, NBC Sports Gold was okay. Peacock is generally a little bit better. GCN was very easy, very reliable. Flow is not, quite honestly. And I think people who have experienced all three of those services now look at that and say, what do we do? And there's no clear answer that we're getting.
That's another thing that kind of kills me about GCN is, again, like we talked about how it was, you know, it was really trying to do something new media-wise. Another thing was, it was done with love. Like, everything they did was done, not like, oh, we have the rights to this, we have $30,000 in the budget, what can we do? It's, let's make this cool thing about bike racing. Like, the stuff that they make, like, they clearly enjoyed watching the sport. They liked making the content. They wanted more people to get into it. They tackled everything from, like, the most inane beginner questions you'd see in a, you know, circa 2014 bicycling site listicle, and made them fun and enjoyable and engaging. And even something where, like, an expert rider, in quotation marks, someone who knew what they were doing riding a bike, could, like, watch it and enjoy it, even though it was really basic information. And that's, like, to see something like that kind of fail, or at least be in very, very hazardous limbo, is disheartening, especially when there are so many other places that, you know, they have the rights, they grab a little highlight that may be prepackaged from the organizer, they put it on YouTube, but that's about it. That's about all the interest they have in it. Maybe that's all they can afford to do with it. But it's just such a bummer to see the people who loved, like, made stuff with love for an audience, not be around anymore.
That's really well said. I mean, it's true. It's true. It goes back to the beginnings of the company. You know, some of the original folks that helped start the thing are still around, and they've sort of worked their way up the chain, right? I'm thinking of guys like Dan Lloyd and Simon Richardson, and, you know, Simon was the one. At first, I was confused because I thought Simon Ware was signing off on the messages this morning, who was like I said, the original founder of GCN, but he's been out the door for a little while now. He's got his cash. So those were being signed by Simon Richardson, who, I mean, I remember in the very, very, very early days of GCN, like, I was on a bunch of their videos back when I worked at Velonews, and Simon Richardson came over and had dinner with my family in France, and it was like 3 dudes. It was 3 dudes out in the middle of the Tour de France, and they couldn't get credentialed because they were doing video, and, like, ASO didn't know what to do with them, and they're just figuring it out, right? Like, they were basically like, you know, I think in a lot of ways similar to, like, us at Escape right now, right? They're just the very beginning of this thing, working on a shoestring budget, basically just like inviting me to be on a video because they needed somebody who could talk about tech, and I loved it. Like, I loved joining those guys on those videos. I loved making them with them, and they remain good friends to this day. To watch them then sort of rise up the ranks, you could see their impact on the product all the way up until now, right? Like, you could see the love of cycling that every single one of those people has. And that, again, to sort of return to the like, oh, well, all this stuff will just be on Eurosport and it'll be fine. To return to that question is like, that's what we're going to lose more than anything. We're going to lose the ease of access, like I was talking about, and we're going to lose the advocates inside the building who are saying, no, we're going to talk about cycling in a way that is entertaining and informative and doesn't assume our audience are idiots, which is like kind of the NBC model generally. And like, how many times is NBC going to tell us how drafting works, right? Like, I got it. Okay. We've been doing this for 20 years now. Like, we're good. Whereas GCN, they just brought the level up. They did an amazing job at that. And again, that's the thing that I feel like we're going to lose out on. Even if you can get to the content, you're going to lose out on that advocacy internally.
One thing I will say, you talked about how they couldn't get credentials because they were doing video. In dealing with rights holders, which is something I've been trying to do for over a decade, doing it in 2023 versus doing it in 2013, if you are like digital focused, digital only, is way easier. Like the people you're talking to get it. They understand that you aren't like cable television network. That they understand that you are working with the smaller budget, working with shorter clips, doing stuff that people are going to scroll through, or in the bathroom at work versus they sit down on their couch and watch for 3 hours after work kind of thing. And that, I think, gives me a little bit of hope that wherever GCN does land, if it lands anywhere, like they will be able to do something. They'll be able to find footage of bike racing at a price they can afford and make cool stuff out of it.
Yeah.
Whether that is, start to finish live coverage of Paris-Roubaix, like that is a lot of money. That is probably not something I would hold out too much hope for, at least from a non-Warner Brothers Discovery GCN. But I think the atmosphere, as someone who is like trying to do this actively on a daily basis, the stuff that I've been able to do to like work with rights holders and get access to is just light years better than it was 10 years ago.
So let's kind of return to the actual, like what's actually happening right now and what we know, right? So like we said before, we heard that GCN was for sale in September, or was being shopped around, basically. They were trying to find a buyer. And there were a couple names chucked out there, and I had actually heard that it was relatively close. And then we heard again last week that it might be even closer. And then we have this announcement. We have this announcement this morning, which again, I need to remind everyone, you need to split in your head the GCN of watching television and the GCN of website and YouTube, because those things are now they're fully split, right? And for the most part, I'm talking about from a sale perspective. I'm talking about the website and the YouTube channel, but which is also like a lot of the characters that you kind of know from GCN. There's a whole lot of overlap here, and it gets really messy really fast. Now, I haven't heard anything else definitive on whether that sale will go through. Like I said, people internally are saying we're going to keep going. Like there's no plan to shut the whole thing down, for example. Whenever you're talking about people making decisions off of spreadsheets, that's not entirely beyond the realm of possibility, but I certainly hope it's not going to happen. Internally at Warner Brothers Discovery, there's also a fair amount happening at the moment. Part of that merger ended up putting the whole entity in a huge amount of debt, and the current CEO, David Zaslav, been doing a bit of a cull all over the place within the company in the last couple of weeks anyway. And this does feel like it might just be kind of part of that broader strategic change within a very, very, very large corporation where, like you say, Cosmo, this is essentially a rounding error, right? The amount of money that we're talking about is a rounding error. Maybe they just want to sort of avoid it. So that's kind of like the context around the big, broad context around the other things that have been happening. It went down much like anybody who's been involved in a corporate layoff will know and understand, quite viscerally, where, like I said, the internal communication happened roughly 45 minutes before the external communication. People were given a roughly 10 minutes notice ahead of a big meeting where layoffs occurred. Again, we're at as the number that I've heard from people who have actually been laid off is 102 total jobs lost. Beyond that, we don't really know internally what is happening at this point in time.
So did you get the sense that you have mentioned prior to your layoff that there was a vibe that you kind of was there that same sense of kind of forewarning within the team, or was it just like surprise? Because you mentioned people like Peru and Belgium. It doesn't seem like
I think it was a surprise.
Yeah,
I think it was a surprise. I mean, I know that sort of morale internally at that company is always a bit kind of in flux. It was a company that pushed people quite hard, that didn't always treat employees really as well as you might hope. I would say that that's pretty common among a lot of big corporations these days. And actually, I would say that wasn't even really like a Warner Brothers thing. It's been a culture at the company to push people quite hard for a very long time. I've over the years, I've heard lots of discontent from various places within that organization, but I've also seen them produce a lot of really incredible work. And so and I've also talked to lots of other people that were perfectly happy, right? So like any big organization, there's going to be a fair amount of back and forth. I don't believe, and from what I understand from discussions with folks who were laid off this morning, I don't think almost anybody saw this coming, at least not sort of this acutely. If you'd asked me the week before I was laid off, are you going to get laid off next week? I'd be like, 50-50. I don't think anybody was in a similar position. They might give you like a 90-10, I'm still here next week kind of thing. Like there's stuff bubbling. They certainly would have read our story about the potential sale. They know things are happening in the background. I don't believe that there was any real indication prior that this was going to go down. Again, like you said, people in foreign countries, like I don't even think that internally they would have had that much of an indication, or else they would have done things like not send people to Belgium. And I do know that, sort of in these big corporations, like this decision was made way up the chain somewhere. And you could hear this in the video that Simon and Dan put together. Like you could hear them kind of basically saying, fuck our bosses, this sucks, right? Like, I mean, they basically said that without saying it. So I think it was a surprise. That's my read on it.
So kind of maybe it's this question more for the Lantern Rouge people, but do you think GCN, the part of GCN that is being jettisoned from WBD, can be a functional entity on its own? Because I know there was, in that story that was published, a substantial operating loss for Play Sports, right? Some like 10 million euros or something like that.
Yeah. But a lot of that was developing things that are now dead. Mm-hmm. So like app development is incredibly expensive. 102 people that are now laid off. Like that's a sizable. That's
a lot of bodies.
That's $10 million right there, right? Like just in payroll. So yes, I do think. I mean, there was a reason why it was valuable to begin with. Like there's a reason why it sold originally for, was it 79 million was the end valuation once it was fully in Discovery's hands. 79 million pounds.
Those are basically just dollars now, right?
Yeah, it's pretty close. I think a big part of that pitch was probably like, we have this talent. You have the rights. We'll put this together. It'll make this whole thing, and that's exactly what it ended up happening. And then it's a good pitch because it was true, right? Like it worked. And then a couple years later, somebody in a suit decided, no, we don't actually care about this. We don't. I mean, they don't care about all the people in our comment section that are sad that their bike racing is going away. Like they don't. These people don't care. This is corporate media. These are like the biggest assholes on the planet. They don't care in the slightest. They're looking at a balance sheet and going, well, this sport isn't very profitable. Let's just not even bother anymore. Right? Like that's basically where we're at with this. But I do think the original pitch was good. And, that value came from somewhere. Speaking as a longtime competitor to Play Sports Network and to GCN when it was just a YouTube channel and a website, when they got purchased by Discovery and they turned into a TV channel, I stopped thinking of them as a competitor because all of a sudden they were in a different stratosphere. They were spending more money on things that we couldn't even dream of doing than we will ever see in the next 10 years. Like it was just a completely different stratosphere. Now, if they come back down to little or less. I'm really intrigued to see what they do because, they had a genuinely fantastic YouTube channel. The content may not be for you, right? Like it was generally kind of pretty broad, tips-based service content. There was a fair amount of, it was sort of hidden advertising for quite some time until the UK government yelled at them and they had to start marking everything, for example. Like there were some sort of tricky things that were done early on, but it was genuinely good content. And now they've added this website, right, which is very news driven, as you would expect for a site run by Dan Benson, the former editor-in-chief of Cycling News and then the editor-in-chief of Velo News, and now this. I think they'll be okay. They'll have to be really lean, and they'll step back into like our poor little cycling industry endemic ad world. It's hard, man. It's not a place you go if you're trying to make a whole bunch of money. We'll put it that way. And so I think that this will be a test for that crew internally as like, okay, well, can you keep the drive going? Can you keep the love going? Can you keep making really good stuff? If the jackpot handle has already been pulled once and probably won't get pulled again anytime soon. That was a bit ranty, but that's my take on it.
It was a good rant.
Yeah.
We are passionate about this. We do care. And we do care about people who also care about this sport, as they evidently do.
Yeah, man, I'm just bummed.
Yeah.
I know how hard it will be for that group to transition back into our space, right? Like I know how hard that will be, and I wish them nothing but the best, absolutely the best. But
100%.
it is hard. Yeah, it's going to be hard, and so not only do we have sort of friends and colleagues in this media space that are staring down the barrel of a lot of uncertainty, but we also have ourselves as cycling fans and all the cycling fans out there listening to this podcast who are super bummed that they just lost one of their favorite products. And so like it's a shit day all around. Like it is. There's absolutely no silver lining to this that I can find really whatsoever. Anyway, sign up for Escape Collective. I think that no, not the time for a pitch. I understand that the answers to this are still very vague, and if you're sitting particularly in North America, and you want to watch Trobro Leon like next year, how you doing that?
I think it's going to get really weird, at least for a while. I think there's sort of two parts to this. There's short term and long term. Again, short term, it doesn't seem like they necessarily have a product that's ready to go. The public communications that have been around this so far seem to sort of split along the lines of, if you're in the Eurosport market, you kind of have a ready-made solution. If you're not, you don't. I think we could see something happen that's really similar to what NBC did, where all of a sudden all the sports content gets bundled into Discovery Plus, their over-the-top streaming service that has CNN, and it has, in the US it has the Lifetime Network and all this other stuff, this other content, much like Peacock does. The wrinkle there is that Discovery Plus looks different depending on what market you're in. And at least in North America, that has no live sports content. There is no American version of Eurosport that's part of the Discovery Plus experience. And so that's the question that I have, is when we look at those rights that they own for those races, what value to someone in David Zaslav's position or whoever below him is making these decisions, what value do rights to the Giro d'Italia, to Tour of Lombardy, to Trobro Leon have? I think there is a chance that it can go long term. I think there's a chance that it can go sort of, we're going to bundle that into this live sports tier, sort of like how NBC has done with Peacock. And it's maybe not a big part of it, but it's there. Or especially with races like Trobro Leon, I think it's something where you could easily see them just sort of abandon the media rights, sell them to somebody else. And you don't have the package that GCN put together, which was basically everything that you wanted to watch in one place. And that, I think, is the big risk, is that things get balkanized again, and they sort of spread out, and you have to hunt for this specific race that I want to watch. And instead of, we got to a point where basically there were 2, maybe 3 services, if you were in North America, that you wanted to subscribe to get full coverage of everything. World Cup mountain biking, cyclocross, track, you name it. All this stuff was like, it was in one of those. Now we may go back long term to a place where that doesn't exist, and you really do have to hunt for what you want.
Having everything in one spot is all any consumer wants, right?
Right.
It's just, God, it's so important. It's so important. Like, no one cares if it's on. Actually, you know what? GCN was the one place where people really did care. They're like, hey, it's on GCN. We know there's going to be a certain level of quality to it. It's going to be done by people who care what they're doing. Not that other places aren't like that, but it was sort of like the brand was like a guarantee. But for the most part, people don't care. They just want to watch the bikes, and they don't understand why they can't watch the bikes in the same place, in May versus in July. I don't understand, given that these are rounding error numbers we're talking about, why somebody with part of a large corporation doesn't say, what's going to make our bike racing coverage in July better is if we own all the bike racing coverage throughout the year for another $2 million or whatever it would cost to get that as a TV channel. It just, to me, the fact that doesn't happen is a little mind-boggling, especially because from all that I can hear, like the big network productions of cycling in the US all lose money. The TV network productions all lose money. So if you're going to lose $10 million, what's losing $12 million in a multi-billion-dollar company? And if you get everything in one place, maybe you lose those extra $2 million for a year or two, but then you start to lose, only $6 million or $5 million as more people are able to be like, I'm just going to turn on bike racing and see what happens. Or like, I heard this was a cool bike race with the roads made out of stones and people crashing all over the place. Like it's just, I don't quite understand why it remains so balkanized when it is such, from a corporate perspective, a trivial expense to debalkanize it.
They don't care. They don't care. I mean, maybe it's my personal experience within media over the last decade plus, but every interaction I've had with somebody who has never made something in their lives and is making decisions around these sort of things is they don't give a shit about you. And that is why we did this. Like, it's the whole purpose. Because guess what? We do. We care. And I think that, like, until the best thing about GCN was that for a brief period of time, the people making those calls cared. And now we're back into no care land. Just the most massive bummer.
You make some No Care Land shirts.
No Care Land. Yeah. Death to MBAs. I don't know. Like, come up with something that is going to be, maybe that's a little harsh. I like a good MBA.
Death to MBA.
You get what I'm saying.
That is probably a little bit harsh.
That's a bit harsh.
Just a
That's a bit harsh.
I think, but you raise a good point though, that like both of you, that one of the things that marked GCN's approach was that they sort of took the same level of production quality to races, whether it was the Giro or Tropo Leon. And like, you guys probably remember this too, but like, way back in the bad old days with Outdoor Life Network, back when it was called Outdoor Life Network, but
we thought it was good at the time because it was better, which we thought was amazing at the time.
Yeah, we were willing to put up with the Lincoln Navigator ad every 7 minutes.
The same one. That song was stuck in my head for weeks. But anyway,
you probably remember, like, early on, one of the first races they got rights to was the Giro, but they didn't have any budget to do any sort of like production around it. So I think it was 2001, 2002, the year that Simone got thrown out for punching somebody. They ran the footage with nothing but ambient sound. It was helicopter and crowd noise. That was it. And it was like, on the one hand, it was the most raw, pure race watching experience I've ever had, because it was just like, you're just watching this with nothing but your own vision to tell you like what's going on in the race. On the other hand, it was like fucking comically shambolic for them to do that. Like, what you are an American broadcast TV network. What do you mean you don't have some commentary for this? And I do wonder, like, are we looking at that? We're like, yeah, okay, I get Tropo Leon, but there's literally no audio or something like that. Now, the flip side of that is like, okay, Discovery does have an investment in Flow. They are a large American media company. It's possible that they could do something reasonably decent and bundle this along with a bunch of other sports stuff they have and start some kind of a sports vertical within Discovery Plus for the markets where it doesn't exist. I do want to hold that option out there. That's the only thing, that saves my optimism at this point.
Yeah,
sorry.
We can hope. I think it's time for us to wrap up this special episode here, emergency episode. We don't pull these out all that often, and frankly, there's not a single other media company dying in cycling that would result in this, except for maybe us. So
dark.
Let's hope that doesn't happen.
Let's hope that one doesn't happen. Yeah, but GCN's become really important to all of us because of the amazing work that they did. And again, I want to like sort of recenter this on 102 people that just lost their jobs this morning. Yes, we're all bummed that we can't watch our bike racing, but like I said, pour one out for those folks. It sucks. I was here exactly a year ago. It's terrifying, particularly in this in this cycling media market. Let's sort of remind ourselves of that. If you get a chance, or if you know anybody who worked over there, send them a note and tell them that you appreciate their work. Because, well, we all do. That's why we're making this podcast. That's why you're listening to it for 40 minutes. And we can just hope that they all land on their feet as best as possible. And that Warner Brothers Discovery, figures out what on earth to do with all these rights that they own in a way that is suitable for the rest of us.
Sell direct to the American consumer.
Sell direct to the American. No, because we're rebundling. Sometimes we bundle. Sometimes we unbundle. Sometimes we bundle again. We're in a bundling. We're bundle. We're gonna recreate cable packages, except now it's gonna be twice as expensive, and you need 3 of them. It's gonna be great.
What could possibly go wrong?
Well,
what could possibly go?
ESPN can't charge $7 per subscriber if you bundle a bunch of streaming packages, which they could do.
That's true.
With cable. If I were ESPN, I might be in on the cycling rights thing.
Yeah,
because I think they're pivoting to like go direct, to be their own the sports streaming thing.
Well, so here's the other option. Anybody out there listening has a couple $1 million burning a hole in your pocket. No, not a couple $100 million burning a hole in your pocket. Reach out. You know, we could recreate this. We already have subscriptions set up. We go buy some rights. Bada bing, bada boom. We have our own TV channel. What do you think?
I mean,
but we need like probably like $250 million.
I don't know. I mean, as long as we don't put it on the TV, as long as we just stream it, that's actually pretty cheap.
Just stream it.
I think something like 20% of NBC's budget for the tour as of 2020 was actually broadcasting stuff like into space as radiation so that people could watch it. Again, I'm weird, but it's been a long time since I sat down and watched over-the-air TV. You know, my TV basically functions as an endpoint for a streaming service website. I still use it's built into the TV, but that's functionally what's happening. So,
well, we've decided, if anybody's got $200 million, please let us know. We'll see if we can fix this ourselves. And until then, good luck to everybody out there affected. Good luck to everybody out there fighting the Tiz ad bots. Just good luck to everybody. And we'll be back. We'll be back soon with more regular episodes. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Cosmo.